Hey everyone, it's Flava, and today we're going to be discussing why indie games can beat AAA titles. A big reason for this is that indie creators and developers are most of the time gamers who have played games and kind of know what people want or what they'd like to see in a game, whereas AAA companies don't normally have gamers. They have marketing teams and they have people who know how to code, but they don't have gamers on site. And they aren't very good most of the time, for instance you, Call of Duty, at asking their fan base what they want or even listening to them once they do tell them what they want. The second reason for this is costs of indie games. Indie games cost significantly less than AAA titles today. With a lot of AAA titles, you may see them reaching $60 to even $80 in the market, whereas indie games can cost anywhere from $5 to $20, rarely hitting $30 unless it's a very good indie game. However, this does not excuse the indie games industry. I'm sure you've noticed that a lot of indie games are actually quite bad and quite terrible to play, and the reason for this is they don't have the budget of AAA games. And what's hilarious, if you were to give an indie game this big a budget, I think they could make quite an impressive game. The problem with indie games currently is that there are so many indie games being produced all the time that there's going to be a lot more terrible indie games than a lot better ones. The more there are, the more bad eggs you'll get in the game industry. Something else that's killing the AAA industry is failure and repetition of AAA titles. They release the same game year after year, Call of Duty, and they do this over and over again without really listening to their audience or seeing what they think. And they don't really have anything to gauge this on unless they announce polls. Some developers of AAA titles have done pretty well listening to their audience. Nice job, Nintendo, proud of you. They've listened to some of the things their audience have said and some of the other things. But even with Nintendo, they ran a poll asking what character you'd like to see in Smash 4, but they'd already added in Bayonetta anyway, so they just claimed she won with no evidence and nobody could tell. That's a pretty scummy thing to do. Now, when you think of a repetitive AAA title, mostly what comes to mind? Call of Duty, particularly Black Ops in this instance. You can see how people have lost interest in games like Call of Duty and other big AAA titles because of repetition and time. In November of 2015, Call of Duty Black Ops had over 20,000 players. However, in the last month, it's only had around 2,000 average. This is a humongous decline. It's one of the biggest declines we've seen in the gaming industry for a long time. And it's, what, 10,000 people stopped playing Call of Duty Black Ops, which is almost unreal. I think another thing that draws people naturally towards indie games is you never know really what the game is going to give you. It's kind of almost an enigma and a little secret, a little Easter egg that you can open up and be pretty surprised about. However, with AAA titles, the game will tell you either on the back of the box if you're still buying discs, or it'll give a description. On Steam and on other gaming sites, the indie game may give you a short description, but most of the time, the indie game hasn't been around long enough for you to know exactly what's going on, drawing people towards indie games hoping that there will be a good plot or story or gameplay. Another thing that kills AAA titles is the time it takes to make them. It takes a long time to produce a good game and a lot longer to produce a game people like. This is why a lot of AAA titles fail. It takes them a long time to produce their games, and doing this can not only kill hype, but leave room for another game who has started earlier to steal the spotlight from the game they were creating. Even worse, if the game isn't fun or isn't good, it'll get bad reviews. All that time will have been wasted, and you'll have to start a new game or completely stop and upgrade and update the new game. But you'll be losing money on these updates, as they'll be costing you a ton of time on AAA titles and a ton of money, which means the introduction of loot boxes, in-game transactions, and starting to become pay to win. So you really have to get the game correct when you launch it, or you're gonna lose a lot of money on AAA titles. Whereas indie games, they really have this freedom. It's like, you know, if I make money on this, that's good. I'm kind of doing this with a passion. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of indie games that are complete and utter garbage, but there are some real gems in them. For instance, I'm sure you've all heard of Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, the game that took YouTube by storm, an indie game created by a short team, and they've kind of grown up and got a bigger company now. But you can see that even now, the lack of the game being played, people don't really care to play anymore because it's kind of become stylized and popular. So I think once a AAA title gets kind of thrust into the spotlight, it can die. Obviously, there are some cases of AAA titles getting thrust into the spotlight and actually doing very well, but most of the time, they're probably going to die in the spotlight. Anyway, I've been Flava. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.